Hello and welcome back to my series where I'm recreating the iconic Met Gala Saree worn by Alia Bhatt. Watch part 1 if you haven't already, where I talk about sourcing fabrics and putting on the base flowers. Today we are moving on to the thread embroidery. Now if you've tried hand embroidery before, you will know that it is a labour of love. And the sheer amount of embroidery on this saree is quite frankly astonishing. Sabyasachi said that 165 people were involved in making the saree, and I wouldn't be surprised if the majority of them were involved in the thread work alone. There's two main embroidery parts to this saree: the big florals that are on the base of the saree, and then the very detailed, intricate thread border. So first, as usual, I got started with finding some supplies. I read somewhere that Sabyasachi used silk floss on the saree for the embroidery, so I started looking for that first. In the past, when I've done embroidery, I've always worked with embroidery thread, and I've never actually worked with silk floss before, so I didn't actually know what I was looking for. But I did a quick search on Etsy and I found these silk threads or silk skeins, and so after studying the saree for a little while, I picked out the threads that looked like they were matching the closest. When they came, as soon as I took them out the bag, I knew that I would have some problems. First of all, they're not twisted like the usual embroidery thread that I'm used to using, and so they would fray on anything. Even while I was touching it, it was sort of fraying on my fingers. And secondly, they came in such big bundles that I had to sit for a few hours and unravel some of it to be able to use it in the first place. But once that was all done, I was able to get started with the embroidery. The border seemed like it would be the easiest one to start with, so I began with that. I've always used one of these hoops to sandwich the fabric between, and that helps to keep the tension. The fabric needs to be held quite tight so that it avoids any pluckering once you pull the thread through. And while that's worked pretty well for my t-shirts and any other pieces of clothing, I quickly found that with net it's not the case. Because net was so fine, it still kept pluckering even with using the embroidery hoop, so I had to find an alternative. Whenever I see people working on saris in India, they've always got the fabric stretched across a room almost on a really big wooden frame, and so I looked into that kind of a technique, and it seems like I needed a tambour frame to help me. I had a look on YouTube and I showed my mum what they looked like, and on her travels to the charity shop she managed to pick one of those up, so I had a go with that, and it worked pretty well for trialling the small florals. So the border embroidery is made up of a floral vine that's running along the edge of the saree. It's not only got thread, but it's got sequins and beads to add to the sparkle, and so I picked out a couple of colours and I started with the small flowers. I think my first attempt turned out pretty well. The flowers turned out looking quite similar to what I thought they would. I thought once I finished the vine, I could have a go with the bigger florals that were on the saree. When I tried to go for the bigger ones, there's not a whole lot of photos online, so it was very difficult for me to actually find a reference photo. This was the closest one I could find, and so I tried to recreate this one. I spent absolutely ages getting each of these petals done, and when it came around to the sequin petals, it was a happy break because it was a lot easier than putting the thread through and through again and again. And finally, after 6 hours of work, this is where I got to, which I think looks quite similar to the reference photo actually. Because it took a full 6 hours to do just one, I don't know how keen I am to put lots of them onto the saree, but it was really fun to try out this technique for the first time. Once I was happy with my test patches, I was happy to start on the saree itself. So I started with the balu embroidery because I thought, again, this would be the quickest part to start with. But I quickly realised that the tambour frame that I had from the charity shop wasn't going to cut it because it was about 50 centimetres long, and I needed to embroider about 3 or 4 metres along the edge of this saree. So once I finished doing the embroidery, I had to unpick the saree from the frame and then move it along and re-stitch it on again, which was taking up a whole lot of time. So my dad and my husband stepped in to make me a custom frame so that I could embroider about 1 metre at a time, which saved a lot of time on unpicking the fabric and re-stitching it again. Once I got using it, it was a complete game changer for me. I used the Ari embroidery technique again so that I could do the vine actually running up the edge of the saree, and then I used normal embroidery technique to actually put the silk floss flowers on. I've done about 2 meters so far, so looking forward to getting the final bits done, and this is what it looks like so far. I love how they came out in the end, and I actually think it looks quite similar to the original. Theirs does appear a little bit more dense, but I think I'm getting used to the technique, so by the time I come to the front of the saree, I should pretty much be there. This is the look so far. Make sure to follow along for part 3 where I'll be discussing how I did the sequin and beadwork on this sari.